Welcome to today's webinar, How to Overcome Storage Capacity and Data Recovery Challenges in Law Enforcement Agencies, presented by StorageCraft. I'm Melanie Bassich, Managing Editor of Police Magazine, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. I encourage you to ask questions during the webinar at any point, and we will try to address them all. However, if we do not get to yours, don't worry. You will be contacted by email with a response after the event. Our presenter today is Sean Darrington, Senior Director of Product Management at StorageCraft. Sean Darrington has more than 20 years of storage experience. Prior to StorageCraft, Sean led product management at Exablocks, which was acquired by StorageCraft, and Veritas Symantec. And he has held multiple product marketing and management positions covering storage management, cloud, and virtualization solutions. Before Veritas, Sean was the lead storage analyst at Metagroup. Now I'll hand it over to Sean.
Great. Thanks, Melanie. And good morning or good afternoon, depending upon where you're joining us from. Appreciate everybody taking the time out today to deal with a challenge that a lot of us have been dealing with for years, right? As Melanie said, I've been in the storage industry for more than 20 years, and every year some of the same things repeat themselves, right? How do you manage more storage, and how do you protect the information in a better way that is ever-changing in terms of requirements and be able to provide the best service at the lowest cost, right? A lot of the same consistent themes over the years, but we've got a new twist on things with different threat vectors, different changing environments in terms of where you now have to deal with different media types, dash cams, body-worn cameras, etc. Those are all leading to not only the data growth, but also the unpredictability about how many cameras, how many shifts, what's the storage capacity growth going to be like over the years, and how am I going to actually minimize my storage management complexity, right? How am I going to be able to look at different threat vectors that weren't there before, particularly years ago, but are ever evolving, right? And cybercrime is a business, and that affects certainly law enforcement agencies, but also other verticals as well, where historically it used to be individuals looking for notoriety, right? Individuals targeting and holding information for ransom, not for necessarily payments, but also just more for recognition. However, it has shifted into a business, right? And now all of us have to think about a question about, well, it's not a matter of if we're going to be hit with an attack, and it may be ransomware, it might be other cybercrime, right? But if we're going to be hit, it's a matter of when. And that actually is one of the things that impacts how organizations and agencies look at even things like phishing attacks and URLs, which may not be a full ransomware infection. However, it can still wreak havoc on the officers and on the employees in the agency. And if you look at where these deployments and where these phishing attacks and URLs are coming from, there's a significant increase in them, but also you can see the major countries where they originate from, which is less important than the actual phishing attack and URL increase just in terms of the number of attacks. But this is a different threat vector than a lot of us have been thinking about, as opposed to traditionally, well, my database is corrupt or my users deleted files that need to be recovered. So what we've done here at StorageCraft is we've really taken a step back and looked at what can we deliver for agencies to solve these problems I just articulated. The first is that we're delivering OneSafe, which is a converged scale-out storage solution. This converged solution offers you the opportunity to look at solving challenges around just storage management, right? Primary storage for unstructured data, or even primary storage for VMware, but also the opportunity to protect applications running on VMware, physical servers, Hyper-V, in a converged architecture that allows you to take advantage of the scale-out storage for both storage and data protection use. For different size agencies, different size deployments, potentially remote location, we also have the opportunity for ShadowSafe to be the ability to protect applications. The same SLA-based approach, and I'll get into a little bit more about that in a little bit, but that same SLA-based data protection in a software-only, right, model. And so you can use either your own storage or third-party storage. It doesn't have to be a fully converged solution. In both cases, depending upon your fault domain protection, and if you're looking to get the information off-site, there is the opportunity to leverage our cloud services which has the full DR as a service offering, where you can actually recover the application, the data, as well as the networking services running in our cloud, and delivering your users on-prem the ability to run those applications, and then obviously coordinated fail-back solutions for that from our cloud services. But underlying OneSafe, really the converged solution, that's what I'm going to spend most of the time today speaking about, is how OneSafe is unique in the market, because everybody on the call here is familiar with storage, obviously. However, the way that the legacy storage and scale-up architectures have delivered their solution has been through traditional RAID volumes and LUNs, et cetera. That's built upon a block store. And whether you're serving up, the storage vendors are serving up NFS, SMB, iSCSI, Fiber Channel, it doesn't matter. The traditional legacy storage is built on a block store. And that means you have a fixed number of drives in a group. And now there are other things like thin provisioning and things like that which try to mask some of that configuration limitation. But the basis for this is that the ones and zeros are tied to physical drives, right? The difference of what Storage-Craft has done, and it's actually at Exablocks where Storage-Craft acquired about 2.5 years ago, we built our own distributed object store. And we built a scale-out solution that took the best of both worlds. It presented NFS and SMB file services, so we looked like scale-out network-attached storage to your applications and users. However, under the covers, we built our own distributed object store, which is analogous and very similar to what S3 from Amazon or GCP from Google use for their massive petabyte and exabyte scale storage. Managing information at the object level is inherently easier. It makes it easy to move information around based upon what's needed as you add drives, as you add nodes to your cluster, as you expand storage, as you evacuate hardware that you want to retire based upon the end of its useful life. We can manage that information very seamlessly and make it transparent to any applications that are accessing it. They just see more storage or the same amount of storage or less storage. But the difference here is that because we're an object store underneath the covers, you get the best of both worlds. You get file system access on the front end, so your applications are writing files to us. We do inline deduplication, compression, encryption at rest of that information before actually converting that into an object, which is just a hash value. But now that object can be placed anywhere in the cluster. And we can move that around based upon different events, a failed drive, a failed node in the cluster, et cetera. But this architecture is such that we've delivered it in a way that we have, you can think of microservices on the top half, file system, SMB, and NFS, but also the converged data protection capabilities I was speaking about. Those services, those data protection services, are actually running on the cluster hardware, on the OneSafe hardware, and communicating with VMware or Hyper-V or physical servers to protect that information and leveraging the same pool of storage. So now from an approach about how you're going to allocate storage to applications and plan for storage capacity growth over time, you're now thinking about a pool of storage as opposed to multiple silos or multiple ones and volumes that are at fixed capacity. You can start with the storage that you need and scale out from there. The software capabilities that we have with our Converged solution are also unique in the industry, where you can actually think about a combined model or a converged model of primary storage with data protection. And because we don't have any RAID volumes or LUNs to worry about, it dramatically simplifies where we can actually do global deduplication across all the shares in the cluster, right? So whether you have multiple shares set up for your users, multiple ingest points for your evidentiary information, we will do global deduplication and compression across that. And you can have the ability to set different storage policies on a per-share basis, but in the case where you're using OneSafe for primary storage for your unstructured data, we have the ability to take continuous data protection snapshots, right? So we're actually taking immutable snapshots every 90 seconds for the first hour for that data. So if something is compromised, your users can go back and recover that information very seamlessly through just right mouse Windows previous version, or they can go back to a time-based hierarchy. But the software that we have is something that also looks at different fault domain protection levels. So depending upon your cluster, the size of the cluster, the locations that you'd like to protect that information, you can determine, even on a per-share basis in some cases, how you want to protect either against a drive failure, 1 or 2 drive failures, or a node failure in a multi-node cluster, where you can actually lose 17 or 34 drives in a cluster and still have access to all of your information, and the file system is available, right? You also have the opportunity, because underneath the covers we're an object store, I mentioned that those objects are actually a hash value. And that's very unique in the ability to protect that information against bit rot or Uber, the undetectable bit error rates from drives, in that the information that you initially write into the cluster will be the information delivered back to the file system. And when you request that, sometimes in the legacy environment, in legacy storage, there's silent corruption where there's a bit flip and that file is now corrupt, and you don't know that it's corrupt until the file system tries to read it. However, with us and OneSafe, we had the ability to look at all the objects, and if that hash value that is being delivered back to the file system isn't the same original hash value, we know it's invalid, and we go get another copy of it from another location, another drive, or another node in the cluster. So it's a very important way to protect the information from a different threat, right? It's not ransomware, it's not a phishing attack, it's actually hard drive errors, right? Computer hardware errors, bit flip, etc. So those types of things are very important, particularly as you look at other use cases within law enforcement agencies that are looking to provide the guarantee that information that was originally written is the same that's being read from years from now, or months from now, or weeks from now. And so as you look at this and you grow over time, it's a very seamless way to scale out your cluster, to do that capacity planning, which doesn't require you to reconfigure your applications or redesign an infrastructure to support the changing growth. We also have the opportunity with OneSafe to meet different application needs, whether they be capacity-based or whether they be high-performance-based. The same software that I've been speaking about will actually run across all 3 of our models here. On the left-hand side, you see the 4412. This is a 12-bay model in a 2U form factor. Similarly, there's a 17-bay model, the 4417. And then on the all-flash on the far right, the 5410. So depending upon if you're looking at high-performance file serving, if you're looking at high-performance video, or primary storage for VMware, those are all cases where you can look to the all-flash. If it's capacity-based archiving, if it's large file serving, you may look at a more cost-effective and capacity-based approach with, for example, the 4417, which you can add up to 7 nodes in a cluster and scale to 1.4 petabytes, and then the usable capacity is about either half or a third of that, depending on what you like to do. So it's something that, when you look at that software stack that I was describing, the features run across each of the models, but the same ability to protect information, that SLA-based data protection I was mentioning, is something that is also a possibility with the Converged solution for both agent and agentless-based deployments. So we integrate with VMware and Hyper-V for protection of those VMs, but we also have the full suite of protection for physical servers. So depending upon what you're looking to protect, we have different methods for that, as well as the ability to recover that information very quickly. So I mentioned the ability to recover from an all-flash, where you can recover dozens of VMs in under a minute. We'll get into a little bit on some of the patents we have around this, particularly for those critical applications that you need to recover. We can recover those in actually less than a second, and I'll share a little bit more about that now. The difference between different requirements in managing that storage, it may vary over time, right? It's not frequent that agencies will actually just do a rip and replace where it's a green field and you're going to kind of do everything at once. Oftentimes it's project-based, and over time you can look at and think about different deployment models and options, right? You can start with OneSafe being the scale-out storage solution for your virtual environment, maybe physical servers, as well as for all of your unstructured data, right? And the unstructured data is really where, in my conversations with agencies, it's much more around how am I going to manage the unstructured data as opposed to the structured data, right? How am I going to manage how many video feeds and body cams are coming in? I'm going to have more shifts, more cruisers. I've got a plan for this. That's where the growth and uncertainty comes in, is more on the unstructured side, which is obviously where the scale-out benefit comes in. And you can certainly look at the storage side, right? And you can start there, or you can start even on the data protection side, right? From the data protection side, that same cluster that same capacity can be used for both purposes, right? You can have multiple shares for the primary storage of unstructured data, but you can also combine the ability to protect those VMs from a backup recovery perspective in that same cluster. And if you need to look at different fault domains, you can certainly replicate that to another OneSafe cluster that's off-site in another colo or another office. But you can also look at other recovery points where you're just replicating the backups to AWS or S3 for archiving. Or you have the option to actually orchestrate that DR as a service with Storage-Craft. Right? You can replicate the backups locally to OneSafe, and you can send to multiple destinations if you want to, but you can replicate those backups into our cloud, and from there you can have an orchestrated recovery of the applications in our cloud and provide networking access back to your users on premises. And so as you look at this, you have different deployment options. Certainly this is the full suite of the deployment options, but you can look at just the data protection side, you can look at just the storage side, and you can look at the combination of the two. And as you grow, this is an investment protection for you, right? You may start with storage, but you can certainly augment that with data protection at any point in time. And when you look at this, you also have the opportunity for different SLAs, right, to provide costs and consequences to management, right? Based upon the requirement for getting back application data, obviously in the event of failure, that's a given, right? The question is, how quickly do you want it back? And as you look at different either hard drive or all-flash solutions, you have different performing requirements, right? And you have costs and consequences. More upfront costs on the all-flash solution. However, you're going to get the applications back that much faster. In fact, when you're looking at this, we actually have patents around virtual boot. Virtual boot is our ability to instantly recover any size VM in less than a minute. And the way that we do this is we have the patents around VMware for the ability to have the VM that you're going to recover begin to boot off of the target, in this case the OneSafe target. And the primary storage is still there. And the ability to have that VM boot, it will begin to read the data from OneSafe, and the VM looks like it's actually accessing the data from the primary data store, right? So you don't have to wait to fully recover the entire let's just say a terabyte VM. The application is booting in less than a second, log in, start to use it. We will recover the information based upon how the application needs that data. As the application requests the data, we do that recovery directly from OneSafe and move that back to the primary storage. If the application is not requesting data, we will continue to recover that information back to the primary storage. So in the end, when all the data is moved from OneSafe back to the primary storage, the VM and the applications don't know that anything has changed. There's no additional steps for a storage vMotion to then do another operation to recover that application fully back to the primary storage. With us, that all happens seamlessly, and the VM doesn't know anything has changed once the application is fully recovered. So that's an opportunity, and you can decide whether it be hard drive based or all flash based upon those costs and consequences that I was mentioning. The same software obviously runs across all the different models, and it's also managed similarly, right? We've forced ourselves from a product management perspective. I forced engineering to make it as easy as possible to manage your storage. OneSystem is the way that you do that, and OneSystem is the way that you can manage any OneSafe cluster in any location, right? Regardless of if it's a single location, multiple independent subnets, multiple locations, everything is managed through the browser, right? And in fact, we've made an attempt to minimize the number of clicks for so many operations. And so if you look at just the backup recovery and the SLA-based data protection policies, the number of clicks that you have to do is as little as 5 to set up a policy and apply that to 50 VMs in your environment, right? And that's very different than the competition. In fact, because of our storage architecture, because of our object-based architecture underneath the covers, we can do things like remote replication from one cluster to another with different configuration, from a hard drive base to an all-flash, and set up replication on a per-share basis in literally 3 mouse clicks. There are no command line operations that you have to know. There are some fail-safe ones to actually get the network back up for OneSafe to communicate with OneSystem. But OneSystem is a really powerful yet simple way to manage your storage, where you have the global visibility. the dashboard view about what's going on, any alerts, notifications you need to take action on. In fact, some of the notifications, depending on what they are, StorageCraft, we have global visibility into all the OneSafe deployments. Right? So I know the status of every disk drive and network connection for all of our customers worldwide. Some of those alerts will come back to support for proactive remediation. Others, all the emails all of the alerts, I should say, are either notified within OneSystem for you, for that agency, or email based upon the criticality. And it's something that when you're thinking about how are you going to manage more storage with the same number of staff, this is one of the ways that we do it. We want to give back as much time as possible to actually manage storage on an ongoing basis. And when you look at the primary storage for unstructured data, it's very similar, right? It's very straightforward. You don't have to carve up any LUNs and assign that to a particular server. You literally just create a share, and now your applications either mount an MFS export, or the officers and users, they have the map network drive. That actually is consistent and stays the same regardless of how much storage is in that cluster. And whether you're starting with 70 terabytes today and you're scaling to 200 terabytes a year from now, your users don't know that anything has changed other than they see more storage. Now, you can also set quotas at the share level if you'd like to, but they just see more storage. And you have this opportunity to define different storage policies on a per-share basis. So the mixed use case here that you see, where I've got a share for my VM backup and I've got a share for my file server, I can determine if I'm going to look at variable length or fixed length deduplication. Am I going to turn compression on or off? If it's video feed and BWC data, then certainly turn compression off. Do I want to turn snapshots on or off? Right, based upon the data, I may want to turn it off. But on a per share basis, I can say, let's keep these for an hour, and let's keep these on another share for 7 years, based upon the evidentiary information. It looks like the opportunity for remote replication is also there, right? So you have, on a per share basis, the opportunity to say, for these 5 shares, I'm going to remotely replicate that to New York, right? But for the other 5 shares in my system, my cluster, I'm going to keep those local because I don't need to replicate those and get those off-site. In all these cases, as you scale out, there's no forklift upgrade. And as you look at the life cycle of that hardware, after that 3-year or 5-year period, you can simply, as long as you have enough capacity in the cluster, you can simply evacuate any of the node or nodes that you want to remove. We will move that information from the node you're evacuating dynamically, because we're an object store. We can move those to any other drives and nodes within the cluster. We'll do that proactively. And then when all the data is moved off, you simply unplug the old, and the new cluster, I should say the existing cluster with the added capacity, is just presenting the same capacity to your applications. No reconfiguration necessary. So there are a couple questions that have come in here. Let's see. There's a question about cloud backup. Melanie, do you want to, I'm trying to find that question that came through. You want to ask that?
Sure.
Oh, I see. So is this more about what is cloud backup? Yeah, so cloud backup, so there's a couple different ways. So with StorageCraft and our cloud services, you have the opportunity to protect applications locally, right? Those applications can be backed up to a local OneSafe cluster, and those backups can be replicated to our cloud for full DR as a service. If you're an agency that's using G Suite or O365, we also have the opportunity to back up that information, right, where we're actually protecting that information that's being hosted in either GCP or Azure. So there's a couple different ways that we can protect applications, and depending on where that data is located, there are different solutions for that. What I wanted to do next is I wanted to share a couple of examples of customers of ours that are using OneSafe and how they're using it. So Camden County Prosecutor's Office, they're in Jersey. They're actually using a OneSafe cluster and have been for years now for their evidentiary data repository. So all the prosecutors will put all the case files and so forth in the OneSafe. When I say in OneSafe cluster, right, they have their shares. They just dump the files there as the cases come in, and then they have snapshots protecting that information. So they actually aren't backing up OneSafe because the primary storage for not only the evidentiary repository, but also they have officer body-worn cameras as well as dash cams where they do, as officers come off the shift, they dump that data to the feed, they dump those videos onto OneSafe, and then all of that information is protected with our snapshots that happen every 90 seconds for the first hour, and hourly for the first day, and daily for the first week, and weekly forever. And then they just basically have the different retention periods for the different shares, and they replicate that OneSafe cluster to another OneSafe cluster. So now they're not doing a traditional backup of this information anymore. Everything is protected via immutable snapshots and replicated off-site. So you have multiple copies of data in multiple locations to be able to recover that information from. And there's another, I can't name this one, this agency, but this is an agency in California that actually stores the CSI information. And they have a very similar use case. It's a slightly larger one. And by the way, even though I have, CCPO and the California Law Enforcement Agency at 300 and 600 terabytes, if you're an agency that has less capacity requirements, if you need to start at 10 or 20 terabytes, you can certainly do that. You can actually start with a single node cluster, and that's perfectly fine, right? And you can scale it over time from there. In fact, both CCPO and the California agency, they have purchased multiple OneSafe over the period of use, and they simply are adding more to the existing cluster. But in the California agency's example, it's very similar in terms of the evidentiary data repository, but they also have one of the ways that they justified our architecture versus a traditional RAID-based solution is the ability to seamlessly scale out, which is what I've discussed, but also the ransomware protection from snapshots and the immutability of our object store, right? And that actually is one of the things for the chain of custody and the proof of validity of that information is one of the things that really help the sheriff justify and make a decision on what is the best storage architecture, not only for what they knew today, but as I mentioned, they've had to purchase more storage based upon changing capacity requirements over the course of a year and a half, right? And so that flexibility really afforded the sheriff the way to provide storage that was a flexible and agile infrastructure for him. And so the last thing I want to do is I just want to share a little bit on the CDP and really the ransomware side of things. And this is one threat vector. Obviously, there are others that we've spoken about, but specifically, this is one of the things that can capture headlines, but also is one of the things that can lay dormant. And ransomware is becoming more and more sophisticated, and those threat vectors are changing where, a couple of years ago it was very straightforward. Then it became, and depending upon the variant, then it became intelligent enough to begin to disable Windows VSS snapshots, even though it looked like the VSS snapshots were still taking place. They're modifying the snapshots. Just the other day, one of our customers, it wasn't a law enforcement agency, but one of our customers down in Australia, they had an attack, and it actually went in and changed all the AD credentials, changed all the passwords, including the domain admin's passwords, took out the domain controllers, and everything was encrypted, right? They went into OneSafe, recovered the data via our snapshots, and all the backups that they had are immutable. So even in that traditional backup recovery sense, right, if you're using Beam, which you can certainly do, we can be a Beam target as well, or if you're using our Converged solution, the traditional backup where you're going to just traditional storage, those VBK files from Beam can be encrypted as well, and you're not going to be able to get those back even with traditional snapshots potentially. With us, with the immutable snapshots, we oftentimes, I recommend to keep snapshots for backups for about a week, and that is independent of the backup retention policy. But what that allows you to do is go back to a previous known good backup copy. Even if the backup was encrypted, you've got a snapshot of the original backup, right? And that's a way to recover that information quickly, right? If you have just modifications, right, you can right mouse Windows previous version. You can do file, folder, entire share level recovery. But if you need to go back to a particular point in time, you have a time-based hierarchy within the snapshot directory on the share, right? And whether it be NFS or SMB, you have the same type of approach of snapshots every 90 seconds the first hour, and then ultimately weekly forever. And the only thing you need to think about is how long do you want to keep them. There's no complexity about how do you want to set them up. all the snapshots are actually deduplicated against the primary storage, so you don't have to worry about setting up a separate volume for your snapshot capacity and running that to the max, where it starts to decrease the number of snapshots that are taken because you only allocated 2 terabytes for snapshots, like some of the traditional legacy architectures have. Ours is very similar in terms of the ability to think about a pool of storage for the primary NFS SMB shares, but also the snapshots share that same pool of storage. So if you're writing a terabyte of data and you're not deleting it, you're not going to write 2 terabytes of data just because you're taking frequent snapshots every 90 seconds. There'll be a little bit of metadata overhead, a couple percent maybe, but nothing significant, right? Now, obviously, if you write a terabyte and you have snapshots turned on for a year and you delete that terabyte of data, you're not getting the capacity back for a year because the immutability of those snapshots is going to make sure that information is available if you choose to go back and retrieve that. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Melanie. I know there are a couple questions that have come in.
Okay, as you said, we do have some time remaining, so we can answer a few of the questions that came in during the presentation. And one of them is, how quickly can a share be recovered with remote replication?
Good question. So, from a DR perspective, you can replicate shares, on a per share basis, and you can set up that replication in actually 3 mouse clicks, right? The recovering a share, it depends upon how you want to recover it, right? So any target share is read-only. So if you're going to do a recovery and do a read of that share from the other location, from the other cluster, you can do that instantly. If you're going to recover and you want to make that share read-writable, that's also done in 3 mouse clicks. Now, one of the things I actually didn't mention was that when we do that remote replication, it's on a continuous basis, it's asynchronous, and we only replicate the deduped and compressed objects from the source to the target. And you can set up multiple bidirectional replication or multi-site replication where you go A to B, B to C, C to A, if you have 3 different locations or 3 different clusters. And that can be done in literally 3 mouse clicks. And then that recovery is nearly instantaneous. It's like a second. And then as of the last recovery point, that file system, that share, is read-writable as of that time in 3 mouse clicks.
Okay. When adding additional OneSafe to a cluster, how much downtime is involved?
Actually, there is no downtime. When you add a node to an existing cluster, that's done in 1 mouse click. You confirm the cluster that you want to have it join, and you literally click a join button. From there, we may or may not redistribute objects from the drives on the existing cluster prior to the node joining to when you have that other node join. So we'll look at the fault domain protection and look at the drive failure and the node failure within a cluster. But depending upon the size, we may redistribute that data in the background as a background process, but it won't impact the application's availability, the availability of the application to access the data in the cluster. But depending upon the size of the cluster, we may not move any data, right? We may just start using that capacity as it is.
Okay. Are heterogeneous clusters supported?
We do support heterogeneous clusters within model families. So the 4412 and 4417, you can add those to the same cluster, or in the 5410, well, actually, let me take a step back. Earlier models like the 4312, you can have those in the same cluster as a 4412 or 4417, right? Hard drive-based cluster and the all-flash cluster, our previous model, the 5210 and 5410, you can have those in the same cluster. To date, we don't support the mixing of all-flash and hard drive-based nodes in the same cluster, so they have to be the same type within the model family for the heterogeneous cluster.
Okay. Looks like we have one more question. Can OneSafe provide an air-gapped backup system?
So, yeah, it'll depend upon how you set that up. So with OneSafe, you can have actually up to 25 different network profiles accessing the cluster. So if your air gap is in a particular subnet and you're backing up that data, you can have those shares be assigned, when I say assigned, mounted by the backup application, whether it's us or a third-party backup application, on that air-gapped network? Yes. In that same cluster, you can also have other network profiles that you may have on an open network and not in the DMZ air gap. So it depends upon the implementation, but yeah, you can have it air gapped. Is the short answer.
All right, thank you. That is all the time that we have for today. But for anyone who asked a question that wasn't answered, we will be following up via email to answer your questions individually. We hope that you all enjoyed today's webinar. I want to again thank Sean Darrington and StorageCraft for today's presentation. I also want to mention that this webinar will be available on demand on the Police Magazine website at policemag.com/webinars. Thank you and have a great day.